We're going to be talking about Platinum Age books and CGC counts. We're going to take a look at the books from 1935 that have been most submitted to CGC. There are a lot of famous books on the list, but you probably haven't heard of them. How's that? Let's take a look up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. We're in the Platinum Age of comics, but just on the precipice of the Golden Age. We're getting maybe a little bit of a preview of superheroes to come in the Golden Age when we look at the top books submitted to CGC from 1937. Up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Before we get started, please like, comment, subscribe. Watch or look at the description of this video for a link to my eBay store, my email, my whatnot, and my Instagram. And what we've been doing week by week, we've been going through the books, pretty much a top 10 list of the books that have been most submitted to CGC, comic books that is, for each year. Starting with books pre-1935, we're up to 1937, kind of finishing off the Platinum Age. And we're going to see some familiar characters, some characters that have faded into obscurity, and the pre-hero books on the list. So it's going to be fun. We hope you're enjoying this series. Give us a comment, talk about the books that we're doing, and that's always appreciated. So we're going to get started. So there's actually a four-way tie for 10th place on the list. And one of those books is Mickey Mouse Magazine, Volume 3, Number 2. Mickey Mouse Magazine was a monthly magazine, and they broke it down into volumes, which is not unusual, even through the Golden Age. Books in the 40s like Airboy had volumes, and they didn't... Those were more common than the legacy issues, so to speak, that you would have seen in Action Comics or Batman or Captain America or whatever. But so Mickey Mouse, Volume 3, Number 2. There are 16 copies of this on the census. This is a Halloween cover. So it is very timely for this time of year. It is a magazine-sized book. So it is bigger. And you can see, you kind of tell that in the slab, the old CGC slabs. One of the ways you can tell from the picture is that the certification number is kind of shorter and more stretched out. On those. So that's one of the books that came in at 10th with 16 copies. Also, another book that came in at 10th is New Adventure Comics, number 19 from DC Comics. This is the series that eventually became just Adventure Comics. It's a cover by Craig Flessel. Flessel did a lot of work on these pre-hero books. There were several titles that we will see that DC had at the time that eventually became the anthologies like Adventure Comics, Detective Comics, and More Fun Comics. And he actually, in Adventure Comics, he did some of the early appearances of Sandman, although it's likely that he probably was not the co-creator. He was the creator, though, of The Shining Knight, who premiered in Adventure Comics 66. So this is a Flessel kind of a jokey pirate cover, and you know, of the artists who are credited in here are Siegel and Schuster. And there's also 16 copies on the census. Another book that comes in with 16 copies on the census is another Mickey Mouse Magazine. This is Volume 2, Number 10. This is the first full color issue of Mickey Mouse Magazine. And it has this Donald Duck cover, and it you know, again, not much more to say. Mickey Mouse again was a hugely popular character, as were the other Disney characters, Donald Duck and Goofy and Pluto, etc. So there was a huge presence in American consciousness for these characters. Now, another book that also has 16 copies on the census, and we're talking about Blue Labels, universal copies. This is More Fun Comics number 19 from DC Comics in 1937. This particular slab is from the Christine Farrell Complete DC collection. If you have not heard about that collection, it's one that is coming to sale right now. A lot of the big books are on Heritage. And Christine Farrell was a collector, and also I think she owned a comic book store, who collected every DC comic all the way up until, I don't know, well into the 2000 teens. And that includes all of these pre-hero books, the early More Fun comics, which are too large to be slabbed. And a lot of those are on Heritage right now. The More Funs are raw books because they can't possibly be slabbed. So the New Fun Comics became More Fun Comics. And you can see down here at the bottom, all original, all new. So there are characters. Dr. Occult is a Siegel and Schuster creation, who is one of those very early heroes and one of the characters that DC still uses. A lot of these characters from the early Golden Age were pretty much resurrected with maybe some reprints in the 60s and 70s and in the 80s, and they've been brought back into DC continuity as a whole. And we can see that also Vince Sullivan did the cover, and Craig Flessel did produce art. And again, we see kind of these still cartoony covers in More Fun. But what is important about these books, and DC kind of led the way in this regard in the Platinum Age, were new stories. Some of the non-DC books we will talk about on this list were reprints of newspaper strips. So let's go to 17 copies on the census. We have a two-way tie for number 8 on the list. And one of those books is More Fun Comics number 25, a little bit later in the year. Again, the notation here is it's a Dr. Occult story, but a jokey cover by Vincent Sullivan. And that is kind of emblematic of the time. 17 copies of this on the census, and this is before we saw the influx of superheroes. Now, the next book on the list is low on the list for a reason. And it's an iconic cover, a very, very important book. Probably I would say, the most sought after by collectors, but those collectors have to have deep pockets. And we're talking about Detective Comics number 1. This is the first issue of the Detective Comics title, and that was what DC eventually was named after. At this time, they're still known as National. This iconic cover, also by Vincent Sullivan, and not politically correct, give you that, of the time. And there is a first appearance here. It is Slam Bradley. Now, Slam Bradley was a character who was a detective, right? Most of Detective Comics, even when Batman started being one of the features in this anthology, were other detectives. And there was nothing that made them superheroes. Eventually, Crimson Avenger came to the title, and he did become a superhero. But Slam Bradley kind of came back into vogue in really the 1990s and was put back into DC continuity as a grizzled older private eye. He became kind of a mentor to Catwoman, and he's been used by DC Comics pretty continually for the last, I don't know, 20 or 30 years. So it is his first appearance kind of, though, takes the backseat to the fact that this is just Detective Comics number 1. So now, the reason that this is so low on the list, there are 17 universal copies on the census, but there are 19 restored copies. And we will see this about these very important Golden Age books, that the more important the book, the more likely it is to have copies that are restored or conserved. Because these are books that collectors want to preserve, that have been sought after for decades, and that people will better, and that got the restored title. So there, as I said, there are 19 copies on the census. So 17 blue labels and 19 purple labels. You put those together. If we put them together, it would be number 1 on the list. Just for simplicity's sake, I chose blue labels, because as we get into later years, it's going to be harder to aggregate all that. And I use the site cgcdata.com, and I just search by year and come up with these lists. It's fairly easy, but it gives us a lot of fun comic books to talk about. Now let's go to a three-way tie for number 5 on the list, and one of those is Picture Crimes #1 by David McKay Publishing. There are 18 copies of this on the census, and I believe these are David McKay did a lot of newspaper strip reprints. We'll see another 1 or 2 titles from this line in here, and it was, I mean, think about it now that we get trade paperbacks that collect stories. What this did was collect newspaper strips. So if you didn't get the newspaper every day, you could then get a collection of these stories in one of these comic books. Also tied for number 5 on the list from DC Comics, also from the Christine Farrell Complete Collection, is the New Book of Comics #1. This is the second DC Comics annual, and it has a cover. You can see a lot of the different characters here, a lot of them comedic, some of them adventure characters. I'm pretty sure down here below the Owen Comics, that is probably a Schuster work. This also is Shelley Moldoff and Shelley Mayer art. So there's a lot of classics. So we're starting to see a mixture of humor and adventure stories. Now let's go to another book that's number 5 on the list that also has 18 copies, and it is Detective Comics #10, a Craig Flessel cover. This is, the last issue. This is the December issue. Detective Comics was coming out monthly, and we can see from the cover, this is a detective story. This is a police story, and that's what Detective Comics' bread and butter was, these police stories, for at least another year or 2. That will change very quickly. Tune in 2 weeks. Same bat time, same bat channel. Now we go to number 3 on the list. 2 books tied at number 3. One of them is a Mickey Mouse Magazine, Volume 3, number 3, with this Christmas cover. But what separates this, it's the first appearance of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It actually predates the time in which the movie came out. The Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs came out in 1937. I guess it came out at the end of 1937, and this would have come out towards the end, but I guess Mickey Mouse Magazine kind of beat it out. Got on the newsstands before the film was in theaters. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, a very important film in film history, the first full-length feature cartoon, also in Technicolor, and really led Disney to an entire genre of films that are relevant today. Let's go to number 3 on the list. Another title tied for number 3 with 19 copies. This is Detective Comics #2. The second issue in the series, also a Craig Flessel cover. I'm not sure who this guy is in the cover or why he's so jaundiced. And the note here is second Slam Bradley story. Slam Bradley is gonna, I don't know, I think he was in the book until about 1949. So he was in Detective Comics as a backup feature for a long while. So I don't think they've ever done a collection. That would be kind of cool to get like a collection of his stories, like a Slam Bradley omnibus. I'm not sure what the market for that would be. I'd buy one. But Slam Bradley was done, if I'm not mistaken, by Siegel and Schuster. And there are, you could tell that in the art style of the character. Yeah, it was created, the concept, by the founder of DC Comics, Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, and it was developed by Siegel and Schuster. He did the early stories. And he was, I'm not sure when Golden Age of Comics appearances, he ran through issue 152, October 1949. So he was in comics for a very long time. He was replaced by Roy Raymond, TV detective, in Detective Comics. Remember, Detective Comics was detectives. Martian Manhunter was a detective. Powwow Smith was a detective. And even Batman was a detective. Right? He's the world's greatest detective. So there was a reason he was in that. Let's go to number 2 on the list. And number 2 is Comics #1. Rather simple title. From Dell Publishing. Uh, and you can see this is one of the ads, and we talked about this in one of the previous issues. Over 100 comics. I don't think that means 100 pages. And this features the first appearance of Tom Mix in comic books. Now, Tom Mix was a Western movie actor who had his own title of comics for a while. His career, though, interestingly, started in the silence. He made his first movie in 1909, and his last film in 1935. He also had a presence on radio at the time. And he passed away in 1940, but there were 2 comic book series, including a series in the late 40s into the mid-50s that lasted 61 issues, entitled Tom Mix. So those, I think at that time, one of the easy programmers was taking the old Western movies that were kind of B movies at the time and putting them on TV. Hopalong Cassidy was also someone that happened to. So let's go to the book that has the most. So comics number 1 has 20 copies on the census. Let's go to the book that has the most copies, blue label, on the census of books with cover dates from 1937, and that is Detective Comics number 8 with this classic cover. This is a Craig Flessel cover. Once again, not dissimilar in many ways to Detective Comics number 1. And, you know, this is, again, pre-Hero DC. But one of the interesting things is Detective Comics is the title that has been running the longest for DC. The ones that predated it, like More Fun and Adventure Comics, were eventually canceled, and Action Comics didn't come around until later. So there are 28 copies of this blue label on the census, and it's a really cool cover. The way that Flessel uses the colors to illuminate the cover, that is really cool. I wanted to talk about a few books that did not quite make the top 10 list, but are important comics to mention. One of them is Feature Funnies number 1 from Harry A. Chesler. This is the first. These were newspaper reprints, and this you can see. These are the first appearances of Mickey Finn and Dixie Dugan. Mickey Finn was a Irish policeman who worked in Portchester, New York, and that comic strip by Lank Leonard ran from 1936, so this is like the second year that Mickey Finn stories are out, all the way through 1977. Dixie Dugan, who didn't make the roll call here on the left, was another comic strip character created by J.P. McAvoy that ran from 1929 to 1966. So for several generations of people, this was something they were really familiar with, but it's been a long time since they have been in print. Another one, that has 15 copies on the census, also with 15 copies on the census, is Ace Comics number 1. This is a David McKay book, and it's the first appearance of Jungle Jim, Crazy Cat, Blondie, and Ripley's Believe It or Not, which are all kind of important characters. The notes here mentions that it features Alex Raymond art. So Alex Raymond created Jungle Jim, another newspaper strip that was published from 1934 to 1954, similar to Tarzan. Crazy Cat was this cat character kind of above the CE and Ace. And another newspaper strip created by George Herriman that started in 1913 and ran until 1944. Blondie, created by Chick Young, and you see Blondie above the OM in comics, was a newspaper strip that premiered in 1930 and ran well through my childhood. Also a series of movies, Blondie movies from 1930 to 1950. And Ripley's Believe It or Not was a newspaper strip that printed kind of oddities and absurdities, and it was created by Robert Ripley. Did give birth to 2 TV series, one in the 80s and one in the 2000s. 15 copies of this on the census. And the other book that I wanted to mention was Western Picture Stories number 1. This is the first Western comic book. This is by Comics Magazine, and it features Will Eisner art. There are 12 copies of this on the census. So that's going to do it for this episode from 1937, the Platinum Age of Comics. You could probably guess what's coming up next year in 1938. Will it be number 1 on the list? We will see. So join us back here next week as we start the golden age of comic books and the books that have been graded most by CGC. In the meantime, you can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.